Mumbai city has been wanting, because that's the city, right? That's the aspiration of Mumbai city. And so we've had various plans. And so the smart cities mission, much like, say, when we started JNURM, or so many other programs, or even a scheme like Ray, all of these are intended to do something to a city, to change it in a particular way, to give it a certain kind of vision which makes it seem aspirational, meaning in an aspiration which is class conscious aspiration. So when we think of cities, and when artists and others do a skyline of the city, then they come up with this kind of image that you see here. It's this really lovely picture of high rises, and but we all know, meaning people who are working with cities would actually smirk at an image like this, thinking, this definitely does not reflect a majority of the city, because it hides so much more than what it shows. And so that's what it is about. But at the same time, meaning cities and corporations have been thinking about how we can get here. This is our aspiration. So this skyline actually denotes that. So when I am going to do this presentation, since we don't have a smart cities mission, so I won't really be able to reflect on that aspect when we are thinking feminist engagement with the city. But I will definitely draw on the development plan, which was a spatial plan, which we had for the period 2014 to 2034. And we started engagement much prior. The plan was sanctioned much beyond 2014, but that's another story, and we will definitely get into that as well as to the why of it. So the development plan, let's make this into easier. Okay, so the DP 2034, it actually visualizes Greater Mumbai as a competitive, inclusive, and sustainable city. Very much like what the Smart Cities mission is also aiming to do. Meaning, its objective is also to promote this kind of sustainable city, a smart city. Though, of course, the means to do it is more technological than how the DP imagined it. So, but meaning the intent is very much that you have to make a city which speaks of a certain kind of language and does certain. Okay, so now moving ahead, if one looks at Mumbai and when one speaks Mumbai, Mumbai is always almost imagined as this land of Bollywood and money and it's prosperity, and that's what's driving people to Bombay. So Bombay, if it has so many migrants, it's also and people who've done the analysis, it's also that you come here seeking a livelihood. But in this city, which is really rich, where a municipal corporation is able to reject 100 crores every year because they don't want to give up on autonomy, we have people living in settlements, like 52 lakh people. 41% of our population is living in informal settlements on just 8% of the land. So that's the inequity in this city that we are talking about. Meaning, I'm not only talking women. I think meaning women is definitely going to be part of the presentation. But meaning when one looks informal settlements, there are women living there. Women are everywhere. Women are in our homes. But for some reason, when we are doing planning, we seem to just kind of have this very homogeneous thought that one size fits all, much like the smart cities mission, that you create this mission and you think every city would be happy with it, every city will be accepting it for what it is. But of course, Mumbai rejects it. So then we have women who are 49% of the city's population. Towards the development plan, the municipal corporation prepared a document which actually does a lot of details around livelihood patterns, etc., etc. And there it states that the average income is 20,000 rupees per month. So yeah, and the gender wage gap is 22%, meaning it goes from 22% to 33% depending on what kind of work. So if the 22% is considered as a salaried, in salaries, that's the wage gap you would see vis-a-vis men. And if it goes into the informal economy, then it's almost 33%. And of course, as we know that on indicators of literacy, health, sex ratio, vagera, meaning women are definitely, meaning there is a disparity. And that's why I'm here today, and the need to speak about gender-friendly cities. Mumbai, which is the financial capital of the country, has only 16% of women in its workforce, which is really shameful. And because of that, we were able to pitch that to the development plan committee. Anyway, so the rest is, you can read the gender inequality index. We are really sad, 130 out of 140, 155. So now, how do women engage with the city? Now, like I said, in that skyline, we see this very homogeneous picture. But when this city has a huge diversity, Meaning even demographically, we are very, very different, meaning there's a large youth population, there's women, 49% women, there's minorities in this city, there's people who are differently able, right? But when we see women, and if we are talking women, then what is women's engagement with the city? And why should this city think of women? And when they do, what about women should they think? What should women aspire of for the city? And I think all of us sitting here in this conference, meaning this workshop today, we each have an engagement with the city. There's parts of the cities that we really love. There's part of the city which we would like to change, right? There are aspects that we really cannot sit happy with. So how do women there? And we realize that women have a very utilitarian approach with the city, meaning very utilitarian engagement, because if they are in the city, they are either traveling to work, they are doing domestic duties of kind of taking their children to school or going to the market space. It's hardly ever, very rare, that you would have women enjoying the city as leisure or for recreation. Right? It's not something that is you just happens, unless of course an organization like Parcham or some other does these engagements on recreation, which gets young girls into playing fields and places like that. But you would see men occupying the nakas. You would see men sitting at bus stops, just sitting there, with their. So, anyways, so women when they are engaging in the city in this kind of way. Why is that? And because they are engaging in this. Is it because they want to engage only in this limited fashion, or is it that the city is not open enough to allow them to engage in a more inclusive manner, in a way that they can get something out of it? And because our planners then, when one sees this, this is actually the local train in the evening. This is a lady special train for which the women's group had a huge negotiation with the railways as well, meaning the 24 hours ladies Rabba is also from forum, which Marju mentioned, that they were sitting in the trains on the platforms to be able to get that 24-hour ladies Rabba in the train, which is very, very important to a city like Bombay, where the railways are considered our lifeline. Anyway, so this is how it is. And yet the priority in this city, instead of this overburdened railway line, is the coastal road. So why does that kind of priority take over when you know that this is how the situation is? But probably because you do not know this is what the situation is, because the planners who are doing the planning, they're IAS officers, they're officers who rarely ever take the local train, who have rarely ever used public transport, who have rarely ever walked the street, because you have a vehicle at your disposal. And so you don't need to think beyond that. And meaning often people think that it's vested interest which drives certain kinds of program, but I also think that, meaning I would much rather, meaning I wouldn't want to be cynical, because if I'm cynical, then, there's no way I'm going to work towards change. So I would think that it's about ignorance. And when one looks at it from this context, then one knows that there can be some kind of education towards changing that ignorance, to act on it, right? And so I would think that if you were moving in these circles, if you were engaging with the city much like the everyday people, then you would have a very different way of dealing with the problems of the city. So yeah, so this picture is actually home-based workers, Naka Kamgars, the women who are in the train. There's also women who are, who also sit at St. Nariman Point, the Queen's Necklace of the city, at Chowpatty, Vagera, often with families. It's very rare to see a middle-class woman sitting by herself at any of these places simply for the sake of leisure. That does not happen. So now what do women want? If this is how women are engaging, is this how we want to constantly engage with the city? So we do not. We want the city, we own the city, we contribute to the city, our labor contributes to the city. And so then we decided that when the development plan was being formulated, there was a campaign which was put together. It was the Hamara Shahar Mumbai campaign, where there was NGOs, academics, institutions, CDOs, unions, etc. Now, why I'm talking about this campaign is that though it's a development campaign, is that when we think of smart cities mission or any other, maybe in another 5 years there'll be another mission with a different name, with a different kind of methodology, with a different focus, but it will still be funded by public money. It's money that comes from all of us, and so we have a right to seek accountability towards what that money is going to do, and we have a right to ask of what we want from that money, because it is our money. And so this development plan campaign has lessons for all those kinds of initiatives and programs where we should engage, including in the smart cities mission. So meaning I realized that, the kind of participatory nature that was part of the development plan campaign has not happened with the smart cities campaign, meaning smart cities mission. And probably we need to think around that as well, because the DP by itself was not participatory. There was an MRTP Act which laid out that, there needs to be a period for suggestions and objections, and for suggestions and objections, the municipal corporation needed to put out information. But it's all technical, right? Meaning planning is that it is exclusionary, it is alienating, it is technical, and it has to tell you that you will never be able to understand it. It's meant for the planners. So how do you demystify what these people make out to be so technical? So you take it to the people, and that's our work as civil society organizations, to do that, irrespective of what project we are talking about. So let us demystify the smart cities mission for what it is, and to speak out, which is what CFA is doing. And this is a really important initiative that is happening now to educate people on what this mission would mean and how can we intervene in it, actually, as well. So the HSM, the Hamara Shahar Mumbai campaign, it played a very active role in actually studying all of this. It negotiated endlessly with the municipal corporation, constantly, to make it far more participatory than was allowed. So then finally the municipal corporation gave in and called for a public consultation with nearly, and so we had 14 stakeholder groups, which included people from slums, informal settlements, the women's groups, the children group, the youth group, people working on water sanitation, what have you. Meaning it's all there on the website, and the link is shared at the end of the presentation, and you can definitely look at it. And that would, I think, be also useful for the smart cities mission, because what it is aiming to do also has resonance with what the DP, the kind of issues that the DP took on. So now after this, I will just run through some of the suggestions and objections that the gender group. So we formulated a gender group to look at the development plan. They had never thought of it. And because of this kind of gender group work that was done, for the first time, the draft report of the development plan had a chapter on gender. And they spoke about what needed to be done for gender. They introduced new legends to be able to address issues around gender. So, when we look at the smart cities mission, if one speaks about it, it's what is it trying to do? It's so technologically intent, and when any time a technology is used, thinking about women, the idea is that women's safety, as if that is the only concern women have, is to be safe. Of course, women need to be safe. That is, like, I think that's a fundamental right to not be violated in at homes, in public spaces, any which way, right? But there's so much more. If I want to engage with the city, I need to be able to get out and into the city. Now there's studies, and there's studies which are stating how women travel in the city. So let's use that to say that, okay, if this is how we are traveling, then this is what you need to provide. You need to provide us public transport, because women are either walking or women are using public transport. They're making shorter hauls than men do. They're traveling shorter distances. So how do you bring in this kind of transportation? Instead, what the municipal corporation, this very rich municipal corporation, is aiming to do is to privatize the BST service, the bus service in the city, for which now there's another campaign happening. But these are, so one needs to be constantly on watch, constantly on guard, and engaging and letting them know that they can't get away with this. And this is what I think, that which is why the development plan campaign is really important, because it speaks of success of people's collectivization, of being able to speak to this really rich corporation and tell them that you have to listen to us and this is what you need to do. So this was vis-a-vis transport. I don't really need to do this. Maju, I've shared the PPT, and if people have questions, they can always write. And there's also the website where this is explained in fine detail. Then as women, we realize that often our concerns are limited, like I said, only to safety, but housing is a concern for women. Meaning, why should only men talk about housing? And we often also see this with NGOs. And if you see male-headed NGOs and women-headed NGOs, you'll see this really stark difference in the kind of issues that we end up taking, right? So the women will talk about violence, women will talk about what are considered soft issues, and the men will be talking about housing, and the men will be talking about land, and will be talking about political representation and stuff like that. So as women, housing is important. Our access to resources is important. And so the gender group also made those. So meaning the larger campaign group spoke about housing, but then the gender group also included this in the recommendations that they put out as a gender group. Because of course we are living on slums, we are meaning all the DCRs that you do vis-a-vis housing also affect us. Night shelters, meaning women need night shelters as much, and we need separate night shelters. We also realize that one of the very successful parts of this campaign, and I think I have just 5 minutes left, so I will quickly rush to this, is that and when we were negotiating, we realized that we can't put everything on the table. We would put everything on the table, but there's some things that you can really push for and take forward. So what we realized is that when it says, the DP says that only 16% women are in the workforce, this is extremely shameful for a financial capital of the country. And so then we were able to say that we have to change the statistic. This does not really work. And so for that, how can housing? Because what is the, if women are moving into the city, this space that they can live in is critical. And so then we proposed something called a multi-purpose housing for women, which was approved, and land was allocated. So new legend was created for the same. So yeah, the multi-purpose housing on public land, hostels, apartments, etc. Rent for available, easily available or rent for women. Also, we realized because single women hardly ever get housing in the city, so it would be better if the government does it. Apart from that, we realized that if livelihood is such a concern, why are women not in the livelihood space? Is because they are into caregiving role, which consumes all of their time, the non-monetized labor that women do. And so, if there was provisions for care work to be taken care of, and a lot of women in the informal sector are also doing home-based work because that's where they can sit and take care of their children. So how do you bring this also into realizing that poor women also need help with care? It's not only, because they come into our homes or people's homes to do domestic work, does not mean that they don't need it for themselves. So these were the recommendations with vis-a-vis care work. Then there was around health, that these are the services that are needed. Health very critical to women, education and public schooling, and of course rest and recreation. This we felt was really critical because this is one aspect which is constantly ignored by almost everybody. So we have public parks in the city which are increasingly being given over as PPPs, in the public-private partnerships. They keep getting shut between 12 and 4, sometimes up to 5. Now that is the time when women have, because in the morning women are busy getting things ready for their husbands and whoever else they are married, and then taking care of the children. It is after lunch that they have this time to themselves when they can actually be going out. So this is a time when the parks are shut. So this is being gender blind to the needs of women, and so we felt this is something that we want to talk about. They needed to be unbarricaded because there's the concept of the eyes on street. So more than CCTV cameras capture something and record it somewhere. But what it works is that I am here on the street and people can see that someone is violating my space in there and can respond to it at that point itself, right? So those are the kinds of interventions which needn't really have an investment in money. Rather, you don't barricade, you save money. But those were the very simple suggestions that were made. And we realized that one is that you have to, gender is not a standalone thing. Gender needs to be integrated in every component of every plan, including, if one says, the smart city mission. So housing is not devoid of gender. The slum settlements are not devoid of gender. Nothing, meaning sanitation is not devoid of gender. Meaning the women are also have to resort to open defecation in a city like Mumbai and so many other cities in this country. So it is a question of gender. So how do we integrate that in every plan that we talk about? There are norms and codes that this country has. The NBCI norms are fairly good, and if we can use those to influence what we are negotiating for, but they're also very stringent. So what we also realized was that that at least you push for that much, and you'll get at least close to there, right? And so that was our bargaining power there. So yeah, so all planning sectors must integrate gender concerns and ensure women's participation in meaning here because I'm talking DP, the local area plans, but otherwise too, I think that there needs to be consultations that can be pushed for, which have women's participation, but also it's not symbolic. Oftentimes we find women are called because, it feels good to have this body there, which looks like a woman, whether or not she speaks. So let's talk about informed participation and how we can get that going. And so, with this, I would like to end my presentation to say that we all are responsible towards this inclusive and just city. It's not just simply stating that this is what we want. We have to be partnering into getting this going. And this is not like, we, meaning me talking about this. This is, now this is a global phenomenon. I mean, recently, 2 years ago, we had this conference in Mumbai, which was feminist imaginations of the city and feminist methodologies of the city. So, meaning these links will take you to those websites which are actually talking about women planning for the city. There are many, many more. These are just a few for you to kind of get started with. It also has the DP report, which has all these chapters and the legends. And there's I am ending with the HSM website, which has all the details of our action that we did vis-a-vis the campaign. Why this is important is because I think that there are lessons for not just the smart city mission, but any mission that the government comes up, which uses public money towards what they believe is required for the citizens. So yeah, I'll end with this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you, Sabha. We will take up questions towards the end. So if anybody has a question or a comment, or an analysis to make, um, maybe you could put it in the chat right now, and towards the end we will take up the questions one by one. So we will move to the next speaker. The next speaker will be Rajendran Prabhagan. He will talk about Dalits exclusion in the city. Maybe, sir, you have to unmute.
Good morning, and thank you, CFA and others, to give me an opportunity to speak on this important issue. Actually, we encountered the JNNURM initially, which has developed into this the so-called smart city. So when the UPA one brought this JNNURM, we analyzed it critically, and we started looking into different aspects of it and started working on that. But as we moved on, so the JNNURM started more of privatization aspect into that. We saw a lot of privatization being brought in the name of regeneration of the city. So regeneration is nothing but to bring new opportunities for market and to promotion of the capital within the city. How urban development can be vehicle for the development of market. So that's what we understood from the JNNURM. And subsequently, when it got developed into the process of smart city, we got the same things getting more concrete and more consolidated. The aspects of JNURM aspects in the city, urban thing, got more organized and more consolidated. So the important issue what we have looked at is the first encounter with the smart city in Belgaum. See, actually, there are about 6 cities proposed in Karnataka, like Belgaum, Hubli Dharwad, Davangere, Tumkur, Shivamogga, and Bangalore. So, but out of this, the 5 cities are falling in the highway between Bangalore and Bombay. So the 5 smart cities in this, look, only one falls little out, that is Shivamogga, to the interior of Karnataka. But all the 5 cities in the main highway, later we understood this also coincides with the larger the corridor project that has been proposed, and subsequently it also connected to the larger Sagarmala projects and so many other development projects. So by and large, when we see development, Dalits and the excluded communities, especially the slum dwellers, the manual scavengers, the auto drivers, who are actually working on a very low paid income in generation groups in the cities, are worried because, see, any development as such, what is development so far proposed and actualized is that they are talking about development, and they are developing one particular section of the society, or only the capital, the upper caste, the upper class. They take the boot of the development. But whereas the deprived classes, either slum dwellers or the unorganized sectors in the cities, or the manual, for example, the manual scavengers, it is only the poverty, exclusion, discrimination, and violence that they are left to these excluded communities. Like Sabha was also talking about the women. So including women, these are the marginalized communities. What the development has brought, we have already know. But contrary to this aspect, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, in his as advice for the Dalits in the villages, he said, get out of the ghettos. Because he thought this discrimination, violence, exclusion can be better resolved if they can come to the cities. That's what he actually imagined, and he advised Dalits to get out of these village, the colonies, the bastis, and come to the cities. In fact, it worked for a while, at least 70s and 80s. This call had some meaning in that, and people, Dalits, when they came to city, they were able to negotiate their livelihood in whatever little way. Though they were exclusion, urban exclusion process, but they could find some space in these cities, and they could get some little job, some little access to livelihood that was possible. But after the 80s and 90s, this accommodation or the giving space for Dalits and the other deprived communities completely got cut off, because the new paradigm of development has taken the space of cities, and the urban development got to move to another space, another level of development. So in this new way of development, which was proposed again, as I was talking to Maju in the morning, was proposed in the Habitat 3 policies. So if you look at the Habitat 3 proposals, it clearly gives an idea of this neo-urbanism. So neo-urbanism is nothing but the complete corporate capture of urban spaces, because to convert that into a complete exclusive domain of the corporate market spaces. So they want to convert everything. So because the competition within the corporate capital, the global monopoly capital, has actually want to survive itself, place itself, take a strong footing in the urban spaces, whereby they can create new markets, new consumer spaces, new idea of lifestyle. Everything they have escalated to the level, and so that they can ensure their survival and development. So that way, the smart city itself is an idea of a corporate capture of the urban spaces. So coming back to this, the smart cities, what we have when we encountered the first smart city proposal in Belgaum was that the CREDOI, CREDOI is the builders organization, all India organization of the builders. They have formed into a network called CREDOI. And the vice president of CREDOI of Belgaum unit, or maybe the Karnataka unit, gave a call that 42 slums will be evicted as part of this smart city project. So the first encounter of smart city is eviction of the 42 slums. So whatever they are proposed in other things, because Belgaum was also one of the city where the water privatization was done in before 10 years before that, in the four places, starting from 90s, 98, sorry, 2008. So the water privatization was already taken place, and the basic infrastructure is already there for the water thing. So now we have actually spoken how the water privatization water supply by Veolia company, global water giant, how it discriminated the bastis, Dalits, where people had to pay heavily for access to water in the Belgaum city. So now the first encounter of Belgaum city comes saying that 42 slums will be evicted. And who is giving this thing? Not the commissioner, not the slum board authorities, not the government. CREDOI vice president is giving this slogan, the statement that 42 slums will be removed. And finally, when we started engaging with the Belgaum city government to give the to take information to RTI, he says that RTI will not be applicable for the smart cities. And that was another phase of this whole governance aspect of the things. So, which are the slums will be evicted? What will be the process? What are the alternatives done for them? Nothing they are able to give information, because they said no, it's under smart city. This information cannot be shared. RTA will not be operational in the smart city. That's what the commissioner of Belgaum said when we gave application on RTA. So the second aspect is that the plight of the manual scavengers and civic workers, the sweepers and those things. So the basically the different communities issues are basically some 3 to 4 issues. One is the access to land and housing. So what is the space for Dalits, the urban Dalits, for the slum dwellers, the homeless, the street vendors, the manual scavengers, the sweepers? What is the space of house, land and housing? For example, to give you, we need not even go to smart cities. Even in this the present cities, in Bangalore, 45 lakh people live in the slums of Bangalore. And they use only 2% of the land in Bangalore. So for housing are there, only 2% of the land. So 45 lakh people use only 2% of the land in Bangalore cities. And so exclusion and discrimination and deprivation is the rule of the development in the urban development. And when it is come to the smart city issue, it is much more skewed and it's much more intensified, that we cannot even peep inside this so-called separate capitalist excluded city called a smart city. So that's why we for a long time we are asking about the land audit in Bangalore. So how the land use is in put to use in Bangalore. So that is not only in Bangalore, but most of the cities as well. So how the land audit, the government is not responding at all, because it knows, it shows very clearly that it cannot stand the pressure how they have done it. So even today, CREDOI is having its say in declaration of any slum. So a slum cannot be notified without the clearance from the CREDOI officials. So this is what I'm calling a new urban governance and the land governance. So the CREDOI has to give a okay for a DC to notify a slum in Karnataka. I mean, that's what we have encountered only in Karnataka. I don't know what is the situation in other cities, but in Karnataka, the CREDOI has to give a yes to say that a particular slum will be notified, because they are the holding the land in their thing, but the entire urban land, they think that there is an exclusive privilege of their business, the real estate business. So that is the level of governance with which they have really taken into account. So the Dalits, and especially those who are in the slums, nowhere in Karnataka have a tenurial document on their own. That is ownership document, or what we otherwise generally call patta. Patta is the thing that give a land title to the slum dwellers. So nowhere in the state the slum dwellers have pattas, because pattas are nothing but you are saying that you own this land. The government will not have any say or role in the future to evict it. So that way the slum dwellers are inclined to get these pattas. But all over in Karnataka, the government has given only ID cards. They have given Swadhina Patra, then possession certificate. Otherwise, they called ownership certificate. It's only a bogus. There's no ownership, because it's not a sale deed, registered sale deed given to the slum dwellers. So always, even the multi-story buildings built for slum dwellers under JNNURM, they have given a 15 years sale come lease agreement, which says, the condition says the government may take over the land anytime for the development if it chooses to do that. So even in the JNURM project, where multi-story buildings are built and allotted for the slum dwellers, those land, the houses or this living space or the land, it does not belong to them because it is given clearly by the land. So the land ownership is one of the important issue, and where nowhere in the so-called smart city plan, the issue of land, the land ownership anywhere mentioned or planned or proposed anywhere. The second aspect is the livelihood. So livelihood, you know that the Dalits, as people doing scavenging, so doing the low paid jobs, low paid service jobs. So are very important that the capital, the corporate capital doesn't want these type of work to be engaged there, because they want convert into everything into, see, the smart city is basically to see give a new idea of lifestyle, where you have ATM on one level, Wi-Fi on the other level, the metro train on the other level. No, it's everything a very highly technically developed lifestyle. And in such a stream, that's why they call it very smart. So smart for the rich, smart for the upper caste, smart for the elites, and smart for the looters, and slavery for the deprived and the Dalits and the socially deprived communities. And so the livelihood issue is important, that where the people will not have any access to livelihood in smart cities, because there are no street vendors, hawkers, any such thing is possible, because everything will be you'll be on online trading. You'll get everything on your through ATM card and credit cards, supply at your doorsteps. So the livelihood opportunities of these the low cost, socially low cost communities completely deprived, and door gets closed. The third aspect is to right to development. So for example, education or human development or right skill development, all these things. Because in the old type of development, urban development, the Dalits and the deprived communities have this access to school education or skill development or any of these things. But these completely fenced and excluded cities, privatized cities, smart cities are nothing but private cities. Smart cities are private cities. So there's no access to these people except doing for the slavery. So that way, I mean, all these aspects. So the corporate capture of the urban spaces is going to exclude a lot of people from the things. And the fundamental thing is that it's going to deprive of their citizenship. So even when the present development paradigm denies citizenship and representation for Dalits and the for other deprived communities, and these private fenced excluded cities are going to keep these people miles away from their access to any of these things. So, but one thing what we feel little happy is this smart city is not happening, though it is a proposal, because it calls for a huge fund. But what we are actually witnessing is that it is proposing 101 things to lure the middle class and the upper middle class to get into this, buy them in this whole plan of smart cities, only to woo them and take over all the resources that is necessary for the thing, right? And will not really actualize these things. So the smart city is not going to be a very simple cakewalk for the ruling classes, because it needs huge development, which the like Sabha was saying, that the Bombay itself has not denied to have it as a smart city because of the type of resource that is being thrown at or given to for such a development. So the corporate capital want to develop certain portions within the city as excluded and corporate cities. That's what they're calling it retrofitting. So retrofitting is nothing but redeveloping cities according to their needs. Something like fenced, excluded, private, exclusive domain cities for them. So that way, it's more and more when it comes an excluded city, the Dalits and other deprived, marginalized communities like slum dwellers or all the communities that are in the urban deprived will not get access to these things. And much more, one of the other aspect what we saw is that this governance mechanism. So how bureaucratic it is going to become. Already we have seen this in the different cities where we are working, especially in Belgaum, this special purpose vehicle. So the special purpose vehicle is going to be completely a bureaucratic and autocratic things, that it will work on its whims and fancies. There's no access to governance, democratic governance, information. As I said, that the commissioner is denying that RTA will not be operational in smart cities. So the special purpose vehicle is going to become a block in the democratic governance process, and people cannot even question it, because it's completely a corporate driven bureaucrat corporate alliance. So the marriage between the corporate companies, corporate babus, and the bureaucrats is going to, they're going to have their honeymoon, and whereas people, democracy, governance, access to resources, access to rights, human rights, is going to be denied bluntly. And that's a um, so what we clearly see is that the development, present the urban development has offered poverty and destitution, intensified poverty and destitution for the poor, and because they impose their idea of the city of corporate loot. But that's why we are actually confronting this idea of smart city and the development and renewal of the cities with our saying that the deprived classes, the Dalits, the urban Dalits, we have our own view of the development of cities. That's what we call it, people's vision of the city. So only people's vision of the city can make an alternative thing, because they think that only technocrats, investors, experts from bank, and agents of corporates can decide and design what city can be look like, and that is development. But we are confronting that very idea that the experts and technical experts and the urban designers can design the city, but people themselves who have worked, built, run, and holding the lifeline of the city can have a better idea of the city and plan for the cities. And that's why we call the only the people's vision of the city can be an alternative to this whole idea of bungling of entire thing into in the name of corporate development of this exclusive corporate colonization of urban spaces. Thank you. I will be able to talk to you over on the questions if there are. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Rajendran ji. It was an interesting presentation on how the Dalits and Dalit spaces within the cities are being captured, and the cities being transformed into super elite small spaces. Earlier, we thought cities itself as a space for global capital. Now they have to build an island inside the city itself,
Correct.
which even excludes the working class, this the service providers,
Unorganized sectors,
and all the workers which build the city altogether. So we will take again questions towards the end. There are certain questions coming in the chat in terms of how these processes resembles the old caste system, etc. In terms of allocation of spaces in the cities. We will go to the next presentation and take the questions together. Next, we have Comrade Jammu Anand. Maybe I'll call up Comrade to speak next.
Thank you, Maju CFC, for including me in one of the sessions. And I'm very much thankful for organizing these workshops on different issues, most importantly, the urban governance. Yes, for last 15 odd years, I believe urbanization was one of the top priority of the governance of this country. Every successive governments at center have given importance about urban urban development, urbanization. And therefore, we all witnessing many happenings in the landscape of urban India. These changes, happenings are in different sectors. If I put this, that the whole urban governance is, taking a key changes. What the constitution of this country says about happening in last 15 years, then we will come to know that everything which is happening is against the mandate of the constitution. This I am saying with full responsibility, that the whole Panchayati Raj institution, particularly the urban municipal bodies, are being systematically, made weak, and will be made further weak to the extent that it will lose its constitutional relevance, and it is in a way taking away the root of our political structure of this country. And foundation stone was laid sometimes in 2005 by introducing NUM, and that NUM, which sounds very good in a sense, urban renewal mission. So the urban renewal people felt that urban centers will be renewed, and it will be given a new meaning to it. People felt their urban centers will be reshaped, but that whole mission came with reforms. This I am reminding because by and large people have not come across the reforms which led NURM. The reforms were both mandatory in nature as well as optional in nature. Mandatory reforms have been and legal changes in urban governance. In that phase of mandatory reforms, all those laws which are detrimental for free flow of capital were either amended or are being withdrawn. And in the optional reforms, there were around 14 optional reforms. And it was said that every year the ULB will have to take 2 reforms. So in 7 years, all the optional reforms will be carried by a ULB. So in the 8th year, it will be like a urban local body which has carried both the reforms. And what was the direction of those reforms? The direction of the reforms were: 1, to outsource municipal services. 2, companies, this was 1, outsource. 2, to cap the administrative expenses of the municipal bodies so that no new recruitment should take place, no vacant posts should be filled, no increase of posts will be carried. In a sense, the whole budgeting system of the ULBs were carried a sea change, and for the first time, double accounting system was introduced in a political bodies. As we all know, that political bodies have simple accounting system or budgeting system where their revenues, the source of revenues are the taxes, local taxes, and they have their own liberty to spend on various heads. So it was like companies where on each and every head meet with same rate. So therefore, the urban local were first time not in the entire budget, but deficit based on services. For example, water, if whatever money they spent on water, the revenue should be percent, the recovery should be 100%. So to be, yeah, the user charges were introduced, and cities were redefined, and urban local bodies were also being redefined. In doing so, the tagline was corporatization of urban local bodies. So ISOs were given to each and every department. If anybody visit to any ULB now and ask which is there any department having ISO, so you will find each and every department, whether it is education, health, tax, water, transportation, administration, each and every department was given ISO. And this whole ISO business is nothing but to make a institution to avail external funds or to privatize itself. So the first phase of reforms in urban governance was to corporatize the urban local body. And in doing so, the cities were told that they should be the engines of economic growth and should be made center of investment, both internal as well as external investment in the local services. But the local bodies now onwards will be called as facilitators. So this was the first phase of reforms in urban governance. Second phase of the reforms of the urban governance was corporatization of municipal services. In accomplishing this, first time in the municipal governance, urban governance, SPV regime was introduced, special purpose vehicle. And these special purpose vehicles were created on different municipal services, whether it is water, whether it is transportation, whether it is municipal waste and sanitation. So what was this SPVs? These SPVs were basically taking responsibilities of the local body. And when I say the local body, house means elected representative. So the decisions were made at the house, but after creation of SPVs, the decisions were taken by companies, and all these SPVs are being registered under Companies Act. So were shifted, and we all know these companies are undemocratic entities where the elected representatives cannot function, has no place in the company. So the right of the people in their own institution called local body has been taken away. Here the company only recognizes the citizen in the form of consumers. Earlier, the citizens were taxpayers in the eyes of their urban local bodies. Now, transformed into consumers in the eyes of the corporate is corporatization of city itself and is being carried smart city mission. Here the smart city mission is therefore irrespective of city, a common nomenclature of the company is smart. So it is being created in my city also, it is maybe created in all cities which are not under smart city mission. If one go through minutely to this company's article of association, key function of these companies, I'm just quoting to get an idea what it would be. These companies, key functioning is to enter into turnkey contracts, public-private partnership, other agreement, partnership or joint venture or collaboration for the business or its development, expansion with any party, either India or foreign, and to pay in cash or in shares of the company or both for consideration of such arrangement. It means this smart city SPV will be entering into all sort of agreements or partnerships or they may be Indian companies. It means in the urban governance, now company to company relationship is being relationship. So the whole relationship has been now from public democratic institution to that of a company which is registered in a Companies Act, and this company will be having agreements, contracts with any other company. So this is one of the key functioning. Another key functioning is to enter into contracts, partnership and service delivery arrangements with Indian as well as foreign firms as may be required for the implementation of the mission. It means now the mandate of the mission will be accomplished by entering into contracts with firms, not with the governments. So this is how this whole governance for last 15 years, urbanization has traveled from corporatization of urban local bodies to corporatization of cities. Because in urban, in smart city mission, it is basically area development based, ADB. It will be carried on land. It will be carried on land, and whatever portion of a city land is brought under this company, the ULBs will not be allowed to function. Whatever the area brought under this SPV, the elected ward representatives, which we call as city councillors, will have no constitutional and legal right to represent that particular area where they can carry out development works. They may get votes from there, but the territory is no more a territory of a public body. Now that territory has been leased out to a private company, which is SPV. Now the entire smart city is basically nothing but to transform into a surveillance city, to transform into governance based on surveillance. The surveillance will be made both end on the. So in this whole smart city uh, 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 concept, the informal sectors or the workers, the people who are volunteering or providing informal labor have no place, in this. So therefore, at one hand, the economy is taking a shift from formal to informal, where the formal economy or the formal sector has exposed to its inability to accommodate the common man in the realm of a formal economy. Therefore, the common man have thrown out in the mercy of informal economy. And this whole informal economy, all these services are being accomplished by informal workers. And on the other hand, all these services provided by the ULBs are being now contractualized. So at one hand, in the formal economy, you will find contractual workers, denial of minimum wages, and on the other hand, you will find the informal sector expanding with informal labor, where it is very difficult to even organize them and even to really implement various labor laws. So the cities earlier, which were developed around industry, now the entire city is being developed only on the basis of service. So the whole service sector is very fragile, very informal, and the challenge is basically how to retain our land. The challenge is how to retain FSI, floor space index, because now the global capital or national capital wants urban land to exploit and appropriate, and the whole design of the smart city is only to pull the land in the hands of private players, where horizontally and vertically this place will be exploited for profits. So in this whole game, the losers are the urban local bodies. Yesterday, our chief minister in Dussehra rally was very critical, and he was trying to make others understand how the GST regime has taken away the right of the states. And he claimed it was the only single party since beginning was opposing this tax system. So what he was saying is, because of the GST regime, the states have become teethless and dependent with the central government. Therefore, every chief minister at the end of every month has to go before the finance minister of the country asking for its own share. But the same chief minister very what I can say, conveniently forgets the same regime was introduced in 2005 by abolishing octroi, and during those periods a new tax system was introduced which was called as LBT, local body tax. What was happening at that time? The octroi, which was the main revenue source of were withdrawn, abolished, and LBT was introduced to accumulate at the state capital. And every municipal corporate commissioner at the end of the month used to go to state finance minister seeking give my LBT share, and there the state government used to delay, manipulate, what it may be. So in some 2005 to 2015, we saw that all the local bodies were made dependent on this state government, and after GST, all the state governments were made dependent on the union government. But in doing a go by, and in 2005, by abolishing octroi, introducing of LBT, we have given a go by to Panchayati Raj system as far as urban local bodies are concerned. So therefore, the entire design of urban governance is nothing but systematically de-panchayati rajation, de-urban local bodyization, and to hand over the whole governance with its own resources to the corporate world, in which the fight to retain informal laborers' right is a big challenge. Here I want to stop.
Thank you, comrade. I think you have also dealt on something which was earlier not dealt on, which is the whole aspect of surveillance, which is also coming up with the smart cities, apart from the other dealing with. So we are throwing open this this session for discussions. We have a couple of questions in the chat. Maybe we could start by taking some of these questions, and then some of them would be comments, and then we will open up the session for some comments from the participants. Yes. Mridula Garg is asking where gender categories employed through the binaries of men or and women, and an associated question: the accessibility of women and transgender person to cities during and post disaster should be considered in the planning. I think Sabha had responded with how they have done it with the Queer Collective, which is also part of the team. But any more comments, Sabha, on that?
Not really, but I think that when one says inclusive, and what I said in the presentation, that gender is not the only inclusion that is required. That we are, as has been said also by Rajendra Ji, that caste is another hierarchy that it manifests in how we access the city and who can access what they can. So there's a need to have this diverse population looking at and coming together and in solidarity against this one program. This can't be a standalone, so never. So even within gender, we have to recognize that now that because of the way the queer movement has educated us about the need to look beyond binary, if we don't include that, as the government. So thank you for that, and I think that's something that we have to be conscious of, and also caste of minorities, of so many other people who are not able to access the city because of where they are located.
I think because of your involvement also with the in the whole area of minority rights, where people from particular communities, particularly Muslim communities, being denied housing, in I mean, which we hear not just from Mumbai, but in very many cities in the country now. The kind of partners, when we talk about this partners and other indexes, the basic foundations in which the city has to be built, which is on equity and which is on equal opportunity for people, seems missing from it. Can you also reflect on your experiences as also a kind of an activist working on minority rights issues, particularly among women minority rights issues, on how smart cities or cities themselves are blind to some of those concerns?
So I think that within the development plan, we try to raise this issue, especially because the way housing is denied to minorities these days, using so many different kinds of unjustifiable excuses. And we were wondering whether, there can be DCRs, others that can be brought in place. But it's very tricky. However, I think that the Sachin Commission report, when it came out in 2006, has this very interesting recommendation on a diversity index. Now, how if we are able to bring that into cities to speak about, and so they said to promote diversity, basically firms and say housing societies which are diverse rather than just homogeneous vis-a-vis the religious profile, would then get some tax breaks, so property tax break, similar to like you now have the PPCs in hospitals, etc., where you get breaks in your water tax, etc. If your housing society would be diverse, you would be allowed certain breaks. But of course, no government has taken it on because it's not really popular to speak inclusiveness. It's you get more votes through hate. So that's one of the challenges. But I think that as civil society organization, it's something that we have to keep pushing. And currently, we are as Parcham doing a study around experiences at the workplace, and we are working towards some policies which will ensure inclusion at least in the workspace, and then that can be then taken on to also housing and these other components. But yes, you're right that, and especially as Muslim women, I think that the engagement with the sector is even worse, because if you're the hijabi Muslim woman and if you're traveling in the local train, people don't even want to sit next to you. They don't want to give you that fourth seat, or or when they're going to be getting up, they don't want you to be sitting there. So and it's just so obvious. It's really sad that we are becoming so blatant in our bigotry. And I'm guessing that if people knew of people, if caste was written on our foreheads, then that too would become a means to kind of make sure that we are nowhere close to you. Meaning, anyways, I think poverty is reflective. So you don't want people sitting on that seat. You're okay with them sitting by the door in the train, right? But they coming and sitting next to you is unbearable. So I think that apart from what the cities can do, there's also a whole mindset changing that is required. Of course, policies definitely, because if policies come in, people think it's okay to be bigoted and to act on your bigotry. So those kinds of things really need us to, as collectively, come up with some solutions and work together towards taking that forward. Which is, I think, that the smart cities mission being like a central thing. It's not limited to a particular city. It has a scope for so many of us to be actually joining forces, to be saying that when we say smart cities, this is our definition of a smart city, and this is our so more than smart cities, I think we need to start talking about humane cities. So let's shift, meaning let's reword and say that what this country needs is a humane country, a humane city, which is inclusive, which is talking about. So we don't want Dalits only because they are cleaning our drains and doing sanitation work, right? We want them as equal citizens who have a right to the resources that are being generated in the city, generated by our own labor. So how do we kind of bring that into the narrative of a smart city? And for that, I think beyond being critical, meaning I really think that the DP really helped us look at critical engagement, and then the two words bringing together. So you have to be critical, but you also have to engage. So there is no abdication of that. And as a bureaucrat or an administrator, we have to constantly remind ourselves that they are not the MyBabs. They are there because we have put them there to take care of our resources, and so they are accountable to us. And how do we constantly question them? How do we bring about this collective voice? And meaning it is disappearing. There's another voice which is gaining prominence. So how do we now bring our voices together and make it loud and heard and ensure that every opportunity available, we are going to put it out there and challenge it. So I think, which is why I think this was really brilliant, Maju. This session especially, it was really useful to hear these voices and to understand how we can also forge those solidarities.
Yeah, I think that's some of the sum of many of the discussions we were having in this course. You know, this shifting away from this top dictated schemes to what we want in a city. You know, to the cities being humane, cities being sustainable, cities being generating fair amount of returns to the labor with dignity. So that's what the people in the city want to, you know, their cities to be. They want living spaces, they want spaces for recreation where men, women, and all category of people can come together as equals and with dignity. And some of these programs which comes doesn't address some of the needs which are coming from the below. And I think that's why some of us have to talk again and again of what is from the experiences when we deal with issues in our cities, whether it is an issue of a water problem, or whether there is a garbage, or whether it is the changing labor laws, or you know, loss of space in vending spaces in the cities. I mean, livelihood spaces which would generate this the dignity to live together and warm together. So I think that's the kind of the discussions we were having in this. And thanks, Abhay, again for bringing out the whole question of discrimination also within the cities based on caste, gender, and all other categories that comes in, which is not being addressed at one level or the other. We have a comment from Shiva Dubey. She was saying about the sanitation workers of Mumbai have to travel long distance to get to the work sites. BMC workers demand accommodation near to the work sites. I mean, is there a response, Comrade Jammu and Comrade Ranjendran? Is that situation true in other cities than in Mumbai, where sanitation workers don't have living spaces, and workers are not have to travel long, and when we think of housing, that housing is always the EWS housing or the poor people's housing is always kept outside the city. I mean, is there something similar you have witnessed either in Nagpur or in Bangalore?
Um, yes. Um, in Bangalore also, the manual scavengers are generally living in rented accommodation within the slums. Even within the slums, they are in the rented accommodation. But they don't declare that they are doing, they are part of this manual scavenging at all, because the next day they'll be removed. The children, while playing, heckle the children, the children whose parents are involved in manual scavenging, don't get along. They say that they keep them away, saying that don't even play with us. You are a son of this and that person doing manual scavenging. So generally, what they try to hide that they are engaged in the manual scavenging or sweeping, all those things. So that way, the exclusion is complete. It's there's no partial or a semblance of it. The exclusion is complete. So in the housing thing, they can't even get rented house, because rented house in Bangalore, they will ask whether you are a vegetarian or non-vegetarian, to identify whether you are a Muslim or a Christian, who are a meat eater or not. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that what is the occupation, what is the work you are doing. If they see that you are anywhere worked with a very shabbily dressed person, we're working associated with the municipality, then definitely they said no, we don't have houses for rent. So this is and that's why all the manual scavengers on they are living in the peripheries of the cities, margins of the cities, and they have to work move a long way for their work, because wherever this manual, especially the manual scavenger issue, wherever there is a dry latrine pits they have to remove. They have to move along, I mean, travel a long way to do their jobs. So it's also true in Bangalore as well.
Uh,
Manju,
okay. The workers, the president of the employees union, I mean, maybe a comment of how you see workers housing within the concept of cities itself.
See, it varies from city to city. My city, where we have some concentration of uh, corporation owned land where the sanitary workers colonies were built. Uh, of course, Nagpur has a hundred and more years of urban governance. So the permanent sanitary workers in some of the places we find the colonies, but later uh, last 30 or years, not a single colony officially, whether it is sanitary workers or non-sanitary workers, no such colony were developed. Uh, uh, it's out of question in a sense there is no land available within the city limits. By and large, sanitary workers are living in their own houses, but in shanties, slums. And to some extent, Nagpur slums are different from the slums of Mumbai. Because if Mumbai or Bangalore people visit Nagpur shanties, perhaps they may not even uh, recognize or accept to call them as.
Manju, I'd like to add that in Bombay, meaning when during the DP also we had this discussion around housing of sanitation workers, and it was felt that this whole policy is such that because the house is available only to the worker, the child might become a graduate, but to ensure that you have that right to that house, the next generation will continue in that profession simply for the.
Hello, hello, hello.
Yes, Jamo.
I think my net has gone. Is it?
No, no, your audio is clear.
Okay. Now, as far as officially housing policy is concerned for the employees, so there is no such policy as far as urban local bodies are concerned.
Okay. Sabah,
Only some, yeah.
yeah, Sabah, would you like to finish what you were saying?
No, I'm just saying that this housing thing is really tricky because on the one hand you want it, but I think what Mr. Rajendran was saying that about giving that right to that house, so it does not become tied only to when you have the job, because then you ensure that there's a perpetuity of caste-based labor because the next generation also continue simply to be able to hold on to that house. So that has been one of the demands that has been happening. Also, increasingly now, we are seeing a lot of Muslims getting into sanitation work, which was what Pralay was doing. So now, if you see the municipal corporation, and there has been a lot of contractualization of this labor. So now you don't even need to provide them with the house, right? So they're living in the slums, and then there is no labor right. There's nothing as such that you would get through. So those are, meaning I think it's getting more and more complex by the day. So we'll have to think of solutions which actually delve on all of this.
Shiva is further saying in disaster situations like COVID-19, women sanitation workers are worst affected as they could not travel to their faraway work sites. Shiva, do you want to share an experience in a minute or so if you are working in on that?
Hello. No, so I wasn't working on that, but I did a small survey with sanitation workers during the initial months of COVID pandemic. And we could clearly see a gender-based disparity there because at least, men could dare police beating they could dare, and because local trains were not working in Mumbai, people had to travel to faraway places anyways because their work sites were not shifted to closer places. And then they were dependent only on some very few government buses that were running, which would take longer hours. So earlier, if they would take 2 hours to travel to work from their faraway locations, now they might need like 3 or 3.5 hours to reach their work sites. And suppose their reporting is at 7, so that means they have to leave home very early. And in those situations, especially the women participants of this survey, they said that they could not dare to venture out, especially in such dark situation, and the roads were deserted. So the safety concerns were there, and as a result, many of these women sanitation workers who were single-headed families and they had children to look after lost their livelihoods, like lost their income for the month because they were working on contract. So, I mean, even BMC, which was very well connected to, that's a government agency, could not or did not give wages to contractual workers during disaster situation.
Preeta is asking, is it true that RTI is not applicable to all smart city mission cities? Any other experience from other cities? If so, why? So, anybody has an experience both in the participants or in the speakers?
See, Mazu,
Yes, yes,
hello.
comrade. Yes, comrade.
In any case, companies are not covered under RTI.
Right.
But there is other way to get information. In the corporation, they should apply and seek information what is happening in smart city mission. So corporation being a local body is accountable to answer those RTI queries. But directly in companies, they are not under the purview of RTI.
So, does that mean that no SPVs should diverge
Yeah.
information?
If anybody applies to SPV, they will not get any information because it is nothing but a company. So in a way, because of the SPVs, the right of RTI and its territory has been sunk.
I think that's an important question and an important clarification, which may have to be taken up in further discussions on urban issues, because we have seen from the municipal authorities the power moving to the development authorities. Now it has moved to the SPV. So it is, that's completely excluding people and their voices and their right to information and mandatory disclosures. Uh, Mritula is asking about land titling. Can land titling be a desirable option for different cities as it has been done in Rajendran? Do you have
Yeah.
a comment on the land titling? And World Bank and others have been pushing for
इनका क्या हुआ?
land titling for a long time.
Yeah. Actually, recently there are two developments at the national level. I mean, not at the national level, at the different states in the other nation level. One is Punjab. Punjab has come out with an act giving the right of land title as a right to the slum dwellers in Punjab. That is one thing. That's very recently they have enacted an act, and the cabinet has also approved the guidelines, the rules of that act. Secondly, in 2018, 17-18, Orissa brought such an act saying that the land titles be given to the slum dwellers in Orissa state. So these are the two models we have, which have been recently a thing. Because what we find there, when I said about the land title situation in Karnataka, by and large in the country itself, I found that's more or less that's the situation. with these two exception coming very recently, this last month or 1 or 2 years in Orissa and last month in Punjab. So except these two precedents, the land title issue is an issue for all the informal settlements, slum dwellers across the country. That's what I guess now, because I don't find anywhere, even I went to Chennai to see what is the land title they have. They are also having only possession certificate and identity cards. So that way land title will definitely give the tenure document of the place where they are living, will give a definite push to the status of the slum dwellers and their negotiating power. It will give a sort of empowerment for them to negotiate, because as of now they are economically and socially they are non-citizens. They are non-citizens except for voting and they have their ration card and the electoral card. They are non-citizens or semi-citizens or partial citizens. So their citizenship is completely undervalued and their representation is manipulated. So that way, giving a land title to the slum dwellers will definitely give them an extended arm for them to negotiate their status and citizenship within the city.
Comrade Jammu, Nagpur has this big campaign for pattas, and recently I've heard that pattas were also been given to the slum dwellers in Nagpur.
See, Maju, in Nagpur, it's a different case. In a sense that pattas have not come through an act. There is no Patta Act in Maharashtra. Only thing, it's a government decision to lease out the land where slum dwellers were residing for long. So it was like in situ lease out, as well as it was like forming a cooperative housing society of the slum dwellers, and the land will be leased out to that cooperative society. But as far as law is concerned, there is no such law which says about pattas. So it is all political convenience, the pockets where the ruling party is strong, so they go for leasing out in the name of patta.
So this I think we have to be a little careful. What we have seen in Bangalore and Karnataka is this lease come agreement, the lease agreement for the slum dwellers is a trick played by the government to reserve the right of eviction or postpone the right of eviction to a future date. That's what is the lease come sale or lease come ownership document, ID cards, they are possession certificate they have issued. Because what we see is one slum in Bangalore, which is 100 years old. This name of the slum is Anandapuram in Mysore Road, Bangalore Mysore Road, is 100 years old, and now it's facing the threat of eviction. But then they were given their lease agreement were extended every 15 years, 20 years. These lease agreements were extended and extended. But now they say that you have to evict because the land is necessary for other development purpose. So even in the, as I was saying in my presentation, the JNURM houses are given the agreement saying that your right to reside is only temporary. Whenever the government wants the land for development, it may take it back. So with that condition only, the JNRM houses itself are given. So the land title or this registered sale deed, which we are demanding, a registered sale deed in the joint name of man and woman of the head of the family, heads of the families, be given to things, because government now in Karnataka is also trying the same trick. Last 10 days back, there was a cabinet decision made in Karnataka that the slum dwellers given a patta. Then when we unpack this, what is this patta? It is nothing but again a possession certificate. We are negotiating. Things negotiation is underway, but they want to make it clear as registered sale deed, which will be a what we call as patta. But the government is trying to hobnob and trying to again put back the same thing in the same old idea of lease come agreement, sale agreement, which will nothing but they will have the right to eviction at a future date.
Mridula, do you want to speak about land titling, or what exactly do you want to see in that sense? I have a little different take on land titling, because the experience of the Kohlis in Mumbai, they have the collective rights on the land. So the land doesn't get alienated from certain communities who wants that land which is linked with their occupation. They have been fiercely protecting those rights, in terms of collective rights on the land. But also at the same time, the government, the corporations finds it very ambiguous to deal with what they call as the common properties. So they are very comfortable in dealing with individual land titles, which could be sold, which could be taken over, etc. But the whole aspect of common lands becomes quite a difficult situation when it comes for takeover and other things. So I may have a different, but Mudula, do you want to have a word on this? On
Yes. So basically, my question was related to the fact that the Odisha government, it gave out the act in 2018. So what have the consequences been? Like, how has I mean, if anybody knows about, like, how was it actually carried out or is being carried out? And the second thing, like, it was being said that a lot of people in a lot of families in the slum, who live in the slums, they're also tenants in the slums. So once the land titling comes in, like, how does that shape the dynamics of the tenants who live there? That would be the other question. And the third thing was that when we talk about smart cities, we're talking about making cities competitive, or, like, that was the whole idea. So schemes like land titling, which, I mean, I'm sure you will explain that what different take you have, but in case like they work and they are progressive, then could these schemes itself be made like part of that competitiveness, that that if Odisha is giving and now Punjab is giving, should others also follow suit? Can we make that possible somehow? So these were the tenets from which I was asking.
Yeah, the Orissa Act is not yet started implementation in full swing. Still, rules are being made. Certain areas have been selected. Beneficiaries are identified, but not the exact transfer of land has taken place even now, because it was proposed in 2018 and still it's under process. And in Punjab, it is completely new thing. Only recently, last week, on 20th or so, the cabinet has given green signal to the act, and rules are being made. The second aspect, what you said about the uh, tenants within the slums. So that is an important issue, because anywhere in Bangalore, you will see at least 50% of the slum dwellers are in the rented occupation, and that will bring forth a new dimension of the homeless, or the people who do not have a site, a place for themselves. So that will project the need, housing plots need for the people, because the number is so high. It means that even if their land title is given to the owner of the slum, their site, but the people who are living in tenants will be entitled to get land or house in the other places, where the government has to look at seriously. That's a second dimension. And the third thing, I forget what's the aspect you said. You were saying you raised three issues. One is about the Punjab or Orissa issue. Second, about the tenant thing. The third one is,
To make it as a competitive aspiration, like to make it as an aspirational
yeah.
thing
See,
among.
that's what. Now we cannot discuss about the land and housing rights within their set game plan by the so-called smart cities. So that's why there it's important to come that the slum dwellers are become part of the designing in the city, design the city, redesigning the city. So I said land audit has to be taken place. So because how the land use is being put to place, and who actually controls, and what is the logistics, because we see government only a caretaker, are not the owner of the land, and not the owner of the all the public resources in the within the city. They are only a caretaker, any government. So that way, keeping that in mind, the government cannot take ultimate decisions on land and housing and usage of land as per they say, because as of now, they're very clear that the commerce and business seems to be the priority for the land use as per as the government sees. But then the what I mentioned, the people's vision of the city, the slum dwellers, the all the urban development committees as a vital stakeholder in the planning the city, and people's vision of the city, which I was mentioning, should be the central thing. And we cannot demand, issue, or put forth things within boundaries or the framework set by the so-called smart cities. So we have to, that has to be looked separately, and we cannot keep the competitiveness of the smart cities and also do justice for the city makers within the city.
Shiva has another comment. The gentrification attempts under smart cities resembles the traditional Indian village model, where the houses of Dalits were located at the margins away from the central areas occupied by privileged caste groups. This is still there in some rural as well as urban locations.
Others can also have a comment on this, but in what we see in Bangalore and Karnataka and many places in Chennai and other big cities where I mentioned, it is the same replica of the village basti system in the rural village is replicated in the cities. What we see is how a slum emerges. See, we have seen that the marshy, unwanted, underdeveloped lands that's not used by the mainstream society is taken over by the slum dwellers who come here, migrate for their livelihood. They start putting that jugi jobri, start building that small huts there. And that's how a slum develops, as we have seen in Bangalore. So it's very clearly that a section of the area is made to remind or sustained as a slum, because I have interacted with some of the people in the village, in the layouts, who are living in the so-called layouts, and they are conscious about the existence of such informal settlements, and they are happy about it. What they say is that it's better such settlements remain there, because we get a cheap labor. We will get labor people working for lower cost, COST cost will be available there. So that's why it's better that such areas remain within the cities for availing cheap labor. So that way, it's nothing but a Varna system within existing within the cities, and just having a census of the how the what is the percentage of people within the slums. What we see is 70 to 90%. It varies from slum to slum, but 70 to 90% of people who belong to scheduled caste communities within the slums, in any slums. And we conducted census both in Mysore as well as Bangalore. What we see is 70 to 90% of the people who are living in slums belong to scheduled caste. Then, of course, different slums have different categories. But then, by and large, this exclusion, it looks very predetermined, and governance is very much revolves around that predetermined informal settlements for Dalits and other converted minorities like Muslims, Christians, and OBCs.
I think also what we have been discussing in all these sessions is that smart cities per se is not an attempt to, to rework on better housing for urban slums.
Correct.
It's a very minuscule part of the city which is being developed as smart cities, and most of them happens to be from some of the experience which have been shared are already a developed part of the city. So an attempt to it's not an attempt to create a housing for all or a housing for a homeless and create an equal space within the city per se. So the smart cities, as per yesterday's discussions, is heavily exclusionist in the character itself, in the design character itself, because it is not addressing to the pan city concerns of people who are living in the city itself. We are coming towards the end of the session, Professor Marjorie Fernandez has a comment. It seems that the onus of ensuring that democracy can prevail in India has fallen entirely on activists in various areas, including cities. Politicians come to the people only to get their votes, and once they get elected, the policies which are supported by bureaucrats are generally anti-rich and favor big corporates, the rich, etc. Nowadays, even judiciary cannot be dependent upon to ensure justice for the poor and marginalization of the society. Is there a feasible alternative to this situation? The situation is even worse when there is a majority political party in power as it is in the present. Um, Comrade Jammu, do you want to comment on that?
Manju, Jammu has left,
Okay, okay.
I think. He's not there.
Any other speakers? She's generally painting the situation which is right now there, and the question she's posing is that is there any feasible alternative to the situation when the majority is in absolute power, a dominant power, and how do we then talk about democracy and where institutions are captured?
I think there's no better example than the CAA, right? And there's a majority, and you have this anti-constitutional, very unconstitutional act, which is going to impact so many Muslims. And we know it is a majority, but you have to oppose it. Meaning there is no other alternative than to collectivizing and to making our voices heard. And there's no giving up, because if we give up, there's no need for platforms like this. So, I would say that yes, the changes are great. It's worse than ever before. But meaning that's why we are all here, and we will come together and we will oppose and we will make our voices heard. I mean, that's the hope that one lives with and works with.
Uh, yes, I think that's the hope. Whether it is in the brute majority, um, to face the tanks, to stand in front of the roads, to face the tanks, even if you are one, I think that has been what history has been telling us in terms of the struggles of the Palestinian people, the struggles of democracy across the world. That this is a battle, and that battle has to be fought, and battle has to be fought whether uh, the opposing parties majority, minority, or have complete dominance. Siva has shared a study she has done on sanitation workers, so we'll so people can download that study. Who should be saying? Jammu is leaving. Mridula is saying, could you expand on your take on land titling and approach to the comments maybe another time? So we are towards the end of this session. Nitin has also put a link towards interested to those who are interested in knowing land titling in Nagpur. That may be an interesting thing to maybe Mridula as well. So we are coming to the end of this session. Maybe it was a nice interactive discussion on many of these issues which are emerging from the experience of activists working with different communities, women, gender, informal workers, in trying to conceptualize the city of dignity and equity. So thank you all our speakers. Jammu has left. I think he had earlier told us that he was in midst of this whole campaign, where the hawkers were getting the bank loans, and he is also leading the hawkers union in Nagpur. So we have Sabha and Rajendran Prabhakar here sharing their opinions and their presentations. Thank you to both of them, and thank you to all the participants who have been engaging into this discussion, and we will continue it. Tomorrow we will have the next session at 11 o'clock. We will be looking into how cities respond to climate emergencies, and how the whole aspect of sustainability of the cities, and the disconnect between some of the schemes like the smart cities and the issues which are facing the city. So Leo Saldana will be the resource person for tomorrow. So thank you all.
Thank you, Maju, and thank you all for this wonderful opportunity and very enlightening discussions. Actually, it's creating hope.
Thank you, Mr. Rajendran. It was really lovely listening to you. Thank you, Maju, for this.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.